Every single draft class always has a couple of big time mistakes. So today I want to talk about the 5 biggest mistakes of the 2023 NFL Draft. Of course, with every single draft, there are always a handful of big time mistakes. Honestly, we could talk about 50 to 100 of them. Today, I only want to talk about the 5 biggest ones that basically cost the season for their respective teams. If you guys want to see a part 2, let me know in the comment section below where we can do more teams. For now, let's get started. And we're going to begin with my number 5, Luke Schoonmaker going to the Dallas Cowboys with the 58th overall pick. You can throw in the entire Dallas Cowboys draft in this list because they had one of the worst drafts I've seen in quite some time, especially from a team that is traditionally a very good drafting team. Mazi Smith was a horrible pick, but I think Luke Schoonmaker made no sense, even more so than the Mazi Smith pick, because at least with Mazi, there's a chance that he ends up being a good player. I think we all know that Luke Schoonmaker is going to be absolutely nothing. Luke Schoonmaker coming out of Michigan, for me, was a late 4th round to early 5th round pick, and I think for the most part, the consensus was that the Dallas Cowboys made an absolute big time reach for Luke Schoonmaker in the 2nd round. He was an unpolished older prospect who's pretty solid in run blocking, but really bad in receiving and everything else. And I get it that Dallas did need a tight end, especially at that time, because they didn't know what Jake Ferguson was going to be. But I feel like the consensus about the Dallas Cowboys was they knew that Jake Ferguson was going to be the starter, even if Luke Schoonmaker ended up being this really good prospect. And I understand too that Dallas does like to run a lot of 3 tight end sets. However, taking a tight end that doesn't really do anything outside of run blocking just made no sense, especially when there were other prospects on the board like O'Cyrus Torrence, who was taken the pick after, Juice Scruggs, the center for Houston, who was taken at pick 62, Drew Sanders was taken at 67 to the Denver Broncos, Byron Young, the defensive tackle, was taken by the Las Vegas Raiders at pick 70, and I can go down the list because there were several other players who were taken either right before the Dallas Cowboys or right after the Dallas Cowboys who would have made this Dallas Cowboys team significantly better, especially when you look at the current depth chart for the Dallas Cowboys, especially in a year where they really could use a lot of other pieces such as an O'Cyrus Torrence or a Juice Scruggs. When we're talking about all the players that just left for the Dallas Cowboys, Luke Schoonmaker is currently probably, I would say, their tight end number 3, and at best will either be a tight end 2 or tight end 3 for the Dallas Cowboys. This pick made no sense then, and it still makes no sense as of today. But that is the only 2nd round pick I want to talk about because I really wanted to focus in on the 1st round. All the 2nd round picks, yes, there were a couple of mistakes here and there, but that one to me really cost the Dallas Cowboys more than a couple of the other picks. But now we go back into the 1st round, and we're going to talk about Quentin Johnston to the LA Chargers. Coming out of college, Quentin Johnston was a very unpolished product. A big, lengthy wide receiver who has good size, good mass, who really struggled with his hands, but was very dynamic with the ball in his hands. And that being said, the LA Chargers decided to take a bit of a flyer on him to add him to an offense with guys like Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. And at the beginning of the season, it didn't work out, and by the end of the season, after all the wide receiver injuries, Quentin Johnston did absolutely nothing last year. And it was kind of a bizarre pick too, because the LA Chargers already had size in their wide receiver room, but they really needed some speed and dynamic abilities such as a Jordan Addison or a Zay Flowers, who were directly picked right behind them. And I just never really quite understood the philosophy of taking Quentin Johnston, especially when you already had a bunch of size at that position. They really needed somebody who was, I didn't say shorter, and I don't really want to say that they needed a specific body type, but they really needed a speedy down the field stretcher who could stretch the field vertically with their speed. Quentin Johnston can do that, but it's not like he's going to come down with any 50-50 balls because that's just not his game. And it gets even worse when you look at all the guys after Quentin Johnston who were taken. Guys like Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, Dalton Kincaid, Deonte Banks. Those are all great players, and they were taken directly after Quentin Johnston. I think at his best, Quentin Johnston could be a decent wide receiver 3 to wide receiver 2, and maybe, I don't know, who knows, maybe at some point he could develop to be a wide receiver 1, but I just don't view that as a real possibility. It's gotten so bad that LA Chargers fans are so desperate to find a wide receiver in this year's draft, despite the fact they took him last year with their 1st round pick. Quentin Johnston was already known to be a bit of a bust, but I think the LA Chargers are dramatically wishing they could take this pick back. Next up, I have a bit of a surprise pick here, but I think given how the season went for this team, I think it's pretty obvious that they probably wish they went in a different direction, and that is going to be the Philadelphia Eagles taking Nolan Smith with the 30th overall pick. Now, I want to make this clear. I'm not saying Nolan Smith can't be a very good player. However, it's very obvious that this Philadelphia Eagles team has bigger needs outside of the defensive line position, and taking a flyer on a guy like Nolan Smith, who is a bit of an undersized, speedy edge rusher who can get a lot of sacks and pressures, doesn't really fit the needs of what this team actually needed to fix. This was an Eagles team that struggled in 3 major positions last year: the linebacking room, the safety room, and the cornerback room. Basically, everything besides the defensive line last year was god-awful. And there were several guys who were taken pretty much right after them that they really could have used on this roster. There were many guys like a Joey Porter Jr., a BJ Ojulari, a Juju Brents, and most importantly, probably the best player on this list that I talked about, Brian Branch. Those were all guys who were talked to be late first to early second round picks, and this Philadelphia Eagles team decided to take more of a flyer on a big name prospect like Nolan Smith. So again, I want to reiterate, I don't think that Nolan Smith is going to be a bad player. And I'm also not saying that 10 years down the line, they're going to be regretting this pick either. But what I am saying is, based off how this year went and based off how the Eagles really struggled defensively, I think it's pretty obvious that Nolan Smith was not a good answer for them, and they definitely could have taken other prospects to fill in at that position. I want to give a special shout out to the sponsor of today's video, Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy is the easiest and fastest growing fantasy sports app available. I know the NFL season may be over, however, Underdog has plenty of ways to entertain us while we wait for the new season. You may not know this about me, but I am a massive NBA fan, and with Underdog's Pick'em games, I can earn some serious cash. Simply pick higher or lower on 2 to 5 player stats, and you'll have a chance to win up to 20 times your money in a single night. I personally love playing these Pick'em games on game day to spice up my afternoon. And all you have to do is use the link in the description below to sign up today using promo code MetroSports, and you can get your first deposit doubled up to $100 as well as an instant Pick'em special. Check the map on the screen right now to see if your state qualifies, and I want to give a massive thank you to Underdog for sponsoring today's video. And now let's enter into our top 2, and I'm going to begin with Emmanuel Forbes, the 16th overall pick to the Washington Commanders. Now, Emmanuel Forbes had a lot of ups and downs last year, with the majority of the downs being bigger than the ups. And this pick gets even worse when you look exactly right behind them and see that the New England Patriots at pick 17 traded back to get Christian Gonzalez, who is by far a better product and a better player than Emmanuel Forbes. Now, the one thing I will say about Emmanuel Forbes is that I am excited to see how he can perform in the Dan Quinn system, because Dan Quinn is known to have really good cornerbacks who really are different sized guys. Like Trevon Diggs was a slender, smaller cornerback before he came into the league, and now he's one of the more physically imposing cornerbacks out there. The same thing can also be said about DaRon Bland, who isn't physically imposing, but isn't also big and well sized. For Emmanuel Forbes' sake, I do hope he can put on some weight, and I do think if he is able to do that, that being in that Dan Quinn system could benefit him a ton. But it goes without saying that Christian Gonzalez does look like a clearly better prospect than Emmanuel Forbes, and I think it's pretty obvious that as long as Christian Gonzalez comes back from his injury the same way that he was playing beforehand, that Christian Gonzalez will likely be a Pro Bowl to All-Pro level player, whereas a guy like Emmanuel Forbes will be lucky to be a cornerback 2 on this team. It also doesn't help that Emmanuel Forbes was supposed to be the big-time solution for that Commanders secondary, which was one of the worst secondaries the year before and still one of the worst secondaries today. Now the Washington Commanders are going to have to fill in that position or really hope that Emmanuel Forbes can develop and become a better player. I'm going to say the same thing about every single player on this list. I don't think Emmanuel Forbes is going to be a horrible player who's going to be out of the league in the next 5 years. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that I think this Washington Commanders team definitely does wish they could take this pick back, to go back and take a guy like a Christian Gonzalez or even a Deontay Banks, who was taken a few picks after, to their division rivals, the New York Giants. But last up, and I think we all know who I'm going to talk about, sadly, it's going to be Bryce Young. Now, my whole opinion about Bryce Young is that I do really believe that he could be a very good player in this league. I think Bryce Young has a chance to be one of the top quarterbacks in this league. He has every single attribute and ability in the world. However, he was taken to the wrong team. The Carolina Panthers have nothing to surround Bryce Young with. Now, I will give the Carolina Panthers some credit. They brought in a very good head coach, an offensive-minded guy. They also got him some new offensive linemen and a new weapon in Deontay Johnson, so I'll give them that. And I am hopeful that this year's draft they're able to surround Bryce Young even more with a top wide receiver and a top tight end. But it's pretty clear and obvious that the number 2 overall pick and maybe even the number 4 overall pick are going to be better quarterbacks than Bryce Young unless some dramatic turnaround happens. When you're in a draft with a generational talent like CJ Stroud, and I'll even throw this out there too, I think Anthony Richardson is also a generational talent. Going out there and getting Bryce Young was just not the right pick. And I know hindsight is of course 2020, and I know that that's the obvious answer here. And I still don't really blame the Panthers for taking Bryce Young, because I also thought Bryce Young could be a very good quarterback. Granted, I had CJ and Anthony a little bit higher in my boards, but I also don't necessarily blame them for taking Bryce Young. Again, when there's a draft out there with CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson, who are going to be Pro Bowlers and All-Pro players every single year of their careers basically, and you take Bryce Young out of the 3, it's an obvious downgrade from those those two guys. This pick is made even worse when you take into account that they actually traded up with the Chicago Bears to actually get this pick. So with that being said, they not only took the wrong quarterback, but they also gave up several years worth of draft picks to get Bryce Young. Again, I think Bryce Young could be a very good player, and I do think it's a bit unfair to just count him out completely, but I think it's pretty obvious that there's other options on this board who would have been better suited for that number 1 overall pick, especially if you're going to trade up to get the guy. Of Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and Anthony Richardson, it's pretty obvious that Bryce Young has the lowest ceiling of those guys, and I also think that he has some of the lowest floors in comparison to these guys as well. But for the sake of the Carolina Panthers, I do think Bryce Young will turn out to be a very good quarterback. I just don't know if he's going to be as good as Anthony Richardson or CJ Stroud. But that is going to conclude our list. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button, and if you guys want a part 2, let me know in the comment section below. But I love you guys. Peace.